What happens when you take the powerful daughter of a cruel leader and split her entire sense of self in two? Helly R, the innie of Helena Eagan, is a deeply complex and tortured character, likely with much more inner turmoil and complication than is even perceived on the surface. From her struggles in accepting her new life as an innie, to her quest for Lumon's downfall, to her relationship with Mark S., Helly is consistently seen as a rebellious, motivated adversary to Lumon's heavily regimented workplace. The clear aversion to her alternate outie personality and her outie's aversion vice versa presents such an interesting view into the depths of the psyche. So let's explore this super intriguing dynamic in Severance. I'm Ingrid and welcome to my channel. Here I discuss psychology, character analysis, and self-discovery, so if that's something you're interested in, remember to subscribe to see more. And I'll quickly throw this out there, if you haven't finished season 2 of Severance, there's plenty of spoilers in this video, so why don't you just go finish that and then come back when you do. Thank you so much for being here, and let's get into it. First, I'd like to set the scene by discussing a bit about the psychological implications of the severance procedure as a whole. And there's a lot to unpack here. On the surface, the idea of splitting oneself in 2 or 3 or 10, depending on the way things advance, represents the idea of compartmentalizing and automating one's internal or external hardships. From the beginning of the series, we see Mark using severance as a way to avoid facing the grief of losing his wife. We see Dylan using it as a way to find himself, and Irving possibly using it as a way to structure himself. We feel a draw towards automation in all things because we now have a greater ability to automate. With all this technological outsourcing, why not also outsource pain and trauma? And under the surface, this procedure showcases something the psyche's natural journey craves already: the process of individuation. Individuation in Jungian psychology is the process of integrating both unconscious and conscious aspects of self, allowing oneself to become whole and realized. It's the process of uncovering one's shadow, understanding the ego's reactivities, and being able to communicate with one's own connection to a greater collective power, and then integrating all of these aspects into the whole. And with individuation focusing all on integrating these aspects, it's so interesting that the process of removing the severance procedure is literally called reintegration. So in this way, maybe our draw to this show is about our own desires to reintegrate within ourselves, feeling deeply divided and unwhole and wishing to destroy the system or our own systems that place us here. The innie has a really interesting aspect to it as well. Since it's essentially born as a new adult, it can act somewhat as a personified version of the shadow self, while the outie is the ego. In Jungian terms, the shadow represents the unconscious parts of the personality, made up of repressed ideas, desires, weaknesses, and traits that we refuse to acknowledge or integrate into our conscious identity. The ego is our conscious identity. With the severance procedure, subconscious feelings of anger, sadness, joy, whatever, are all residually left in the person, but what's lacking is the intellectualized understanding of why. That means that which the ego suppresses in the outie to conform to societal expectations or to keep consistency in one's belief about self are no longer suppressed in the innie. And conversely, that which happens to the innie eventually must express itself or seep into the life of the outie, as we see clearly throughout the show. So with that rant and with this understanding of the severance procedure's implications, let's look into Helly R's psychology. Helly, or Helena, represents one of the most extreme and fascinating psychological splits in Severance, not just because she is severed, but because she chooses to weaponize her fragmentation. Unlike many of the other characters in Severance, Helly is immediately and intensely resistant to working on the severed floor. Out of all the characters, she is the most divided from her outie. She's adamant that she doesn't belong there and is shocked to find out that her outie doesn't care about her requests for resignation, even telling her that she's not really a person.
I am a person. You are not.
Her complications with her father, her fragmented self, her co-workers, and Lumon as a whole really underscore the complex psychological difficulties that Helly and Helena face. Helena clearly struggles with acceptance from her father, Jame. It's blatantly stated by him to Helly that he does not love Helena because he no longer sees Kier in her.
I do not love my daughter. I used to see Kier in her, but he left her as she grew.
Sound like a great dad.
He then goes on to say that he sees Kier in Helly as she's threatening to stab him and is openly opposed to him as a whole. He says he's fathered many other children in secret and he's never seen Kier in them either. This presents a really interesting paradox. That rebellious, fiery, anti-establishment nature that we see in Helly is exactly what he craves, but what he creates is obedient and cult-like followers. But he only really craves that Kier-like fire in a controlled setting. It can be assumed that this rebellious nature was beaten out of Helena, resulting in punishment or neglect anytime it veered its head. This turned her into a devotional, deeply tortured, brainwashed woman hiding that fire deep below. So when James sees that fiery nature as Kier possessed and required to build the foundation on which Lumon is built, but saw it within the confines of this establishment that he actually controls, he feels able to love it and embrace it. But when it occurs outside of his control or challenges his structure, as it may have in younger years with his legitimate daughter Helena, he despises and works to destroy it. Because we can see Helena's repressed, disobedient shadow self in her innie, we can assume that she possessed this nature as a child when her father supposedly did love her, and it was slowly hidden as she was rooted deeper and deeper into Lumon's agenda. The desperation she has for her father's approval expresses itself as her undying loyalty to even the belief system surrounding the severance procedure, despite how she may actually feel about it, which is revealed through her innie. Helena is aware that for 8 or more hours a day, her consciousness resides in her innie, but she's so deeply devoted to Lumon's agenda that she rejects any pleas from Helly, which can also be seen as a deep rejection of her true inner nature or shadow to appease these external influences. This also hints to how Helena truly feels about herself and the treatment that she believes this disobedient, freedom-seeking version of herself deserves. The severance procedure for her is a literal personification of all the traits within herself that her external self despises. She most likely equates her father's love directly with her obedience, her orderliness, and her devotion to Kier. When she internally questions Kier's doctrine or craves life outside of the Eagan name, she feels disgusted by herself. This makes her feel as if she deserves to be unloved and treated as inhuman because those parts of herself do not fit into the identity that she has built of herself to survive in the external world as an Eagan. But nonetheless, these rebellious thoughts occur. Her refusal of self-reflection or integration of these shadow aspects quite literally almost becomes deadly as Helly attempts to commit suicide, representing the real consequences that can occur when one rejects internal nature entirely. Despite this, and despite almost being drowned by Irving, her father sends her back in.
I'm not going back down there.
It won't be you. It will be your innie.
And Father approves.
Father encouraged it.
In this way, we can see that she's probably been treated almost like she is an innie for her entire life, revered for her utility and undying dedication, not for her true nature. It's almost like the never-ending cycle that's seen throughout generations of abusive or traumatic treatment. Instead of transmuting this treatment into better understanding of self and treating yourself or your children with more dignity and love, you perpetuate the cycle. She's been treated as worthless, as not a person, either consciously or under the surface forever, and a part of her has been dying to have the ability to treat someone else in this way as a sort of karmic retribution. Who better than herself, or the personified version of herself that she despises the most, to treat this poorly? Not to mention, the severance procedure granted Helena the ability to quite literally compartmentalize these versions of herself. Hinted at by Dylan when he said to his innie, "I guess I like knowing you're down here," maybe Helena secretly enjoys knowing there's a living version of herself acting out her deep internal fantasies. Her innie's aversion and rebellion even suggest that Helena craves the destruction of Lumon, and her shadow is willing to destroy any structure built on a foundation of pain and falsehood. And this is really the beauty of the shadow. It seems dark, terrifying, like everything we hate about ourselves and want to avoid, but it is the truth, undying and unable to pretend to be anything else. True wholeness can only be achieved when we've faced and integrated these hidden aspects. If the shadow is shoved under the surface, it always finds a way to seep out. It hates when the ego builds itself on a false identity, and it will do everything it can to destroy that which is falsified. Helena's internal self despises the cage which circumstance and ego has placed her in, and Helly is willing to do anything she can to destroy this. Helena secretly plays along, pretending to herself and to others to be aligned with the plan, but hoping for destruction. We see this in the way that she mistakes Gemma's name when speaking to outie Mark.
Hannah.
Gemma.
Right, Gemma.
Call it a Freudian slip, but Helena may have known that this simple mistake could cost her the trust of outie Mark and destroy the entire Cold Harbor Lumon plan. This is an unconscious act of rebellion, a small act of defiance even as she remains outwardly compliant. It represents a shift in Helly's psyche, where even in her external persona there are cracks beginning to show. These are small signs that the shadow self is beginning to assert itself, no longer willing to remain in the background. Helly's relationship with Mark is another dive into this fantasy. She's at first opposed to him as he plays the part of the dutiful manager. It's only when he begins to show hints of rebellion that she falls for him, revealing him as someone unlike the people that she's been surrounded by her entire life. Of course, her innie doesn't consciously know this, but the residual subconscious feelings of opposition to the structure and communities she's used to are still there. And interestingly enough, Helena chooses seduction and closeness as an apparent way to get in between Mark and Helly. If she didn't also desire this experience with Mark, why not take a different approach? During Helena's infiltration of the team as Helly, she also finds it incredibly easy to make fun of Kier and embrace her rebellious side.
Turned into the forest because he masturbated. I mean, seriously, that's actually the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Fans have noted that she smiles much more as Helena pretending to be Helly, almost as if this childish, devious nature is able to enter her persona as she embraces these qualities about herself. After sleeping with Mark, Helly openly expresses that she's angry at what her outie has stolen from her, which is that experience with Mark. This is a blatant expression of the shadow being angry at the life that the cold and rigid ego has built for Helena as a whole. It shows that the shadow self embodied by her innie is fighting back against the constraints placed on her by her ego. In the final moments of the season finale, Helly smirks at Gemma. Could this mean that Helly was switched back to Helena at some point, or maybe that both aspects of herself are beginning to merge? While this moment seems so subtle, it could be a key indication of her psychological growth or the beginning of her integration. Maybe Helly also has these traits of desiring to be chosen and loved, and possesses the desire to treat someone else as if they're inhuman as a residual subconscious emotion from her outie. This final smirk is a small but powerful moment where we see the shadow becoming less hidden and more of a part of her outward self. Or Helly could really just be vindictive, with her shadow turning cruel because she's never truly known a sort of die-for-you love until Mark, both in her innie life and her outie life. And as much as I think this might be a sign that she was switched back to Helena, if she wasn't, the smirk can be interpreted as a significant moment for Helena's psychological growth. The merging of these two halves represents a movement towards this necessary individuation and embracing wholeness, which had probably been occurring to Helena as the show was focusing on other characters. We don't directly see this individuation process beginning, but we can assume by things like her meeting with Mark, her ease into acting as Helly's personality, her reaction when hearing that her father encouraged the plan for her to pretend to be Helly again, and the general personification of this version of herself, her internal world has to be facing the shadow that she's hidden her entire life. My prediction for the third season is that we'll get to see this integration process unfold, with Helena being unable to resist the destruction of the cage she's been trapped in and placed herself in. Her subconscious desire for freedom, which has been suppressed by the demands of her father in Lumon, will likely intensify. I personally think we can expect to see Helena take an active role in the rebellion, no longer being content with playing her part in the company's machine, but instead beginning to fight for a freedom that she's been taught to suppress. While still secretly working for her father and maintaining an appearance of loyalty, she could be secretly working behind the scenes to destroy Lumon from within with Cobel and Mark and the whole gang. That's all I have. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know where you think I was right, where you think I was wrong, and what your predictions for season 3 are, especially when it comes to Helly. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe if you enjoyed watching, and I'll see you next time.